talk about what's going on in the world of banks, finance, Bitcoin. And Cathie Wood also agrees what I just talked about with FDIC, with like SV Bank, right? I mean, it's just unfortunate that despite the fact we have a lot of weakness and fears right now, you know, there's an agenda to drive out, again, crypto from the U.S., trying to hinder it. So now, you know, besides just fighting Gary Gensler of the SEC, now we got to fight like the FDIC too. Like, it really makes no sense that they can deem if someone buys, let's say, Signature Bank, they can't have any crypto ties or do any crypto business. Who are they to demand it, right? So why don't they shut down like SV Bank for, you know, being irresponsible by buying all these federal bonds, right, that they can't sell? Well, of course, they're not going to say that, okay, because the Fed and FDIC, you know, they're buddies, okay? You can't say that. Why don't you say, oh, you know, banks can't put so much money into bonds, right? Is there a rule of how much bonds you could buy with your assets? No. But SB Bank going under should make people question, like, how much in bonds you could buy as a bank. Is anyone asking that question? No. But yet, they're trying to target crypto companies. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense, right? Hopefully all this anti-crypto stuff that's in the U.S. doesn't completely drive out innovation from the U.S. If it happens, that just means crypto will thrive elsewhere in the world. But right now, we got a lot of anti-crypto people right now, mostly I think to protect the banks. Mostly, I think it's due to that, just to protect the banks and financial systems that already exist. Where's the money coming from? Again, out of thin air. So now it's being reported that this emergency Fed facility program, this new loan program for the banks, could cost the U.S. another $2 trillion. Not just a few billion. Billions means nothing these days. Not just 10 billion, not just 100 billion. We're talking about another possible $2 trillion being created and being loaned out to the banks. So you tell me how inflation is ever going to come down when we have to print trillions upon trillions upon trillions upon trillions every single year. It's not even like we're waiting 10 years. We just printed like 6 trillion the last 2 years. Now we have to print another 2 trillion just as a loan to the banks, and that's on top of our deficit this year, which is already $2 trillion. So that's another 4 trillion. You see how it's getting out of hand. So this the tyranny of central banks, it is real. It's real, right? And basically, it's making everyone more broke. I mean, your money, even though you have a lot of it or maybe little of it, it's just being devalued to nothing, right? It's wild. It's wild. It feels like 2008 again for those of you guys that lived through 2007, 2008, 2009 and what happened, right? It feels a lot like that again. Like, you know, mismanagement of money, mismanagement of funds, highly leveraged banks, they're going under, but the Fed and central banks around the world are trying to cover up for them because they are deemed too big to fail. If they fail, it's just too disastrous, right? So now they're in this position where they have to save them. And here's something else too. There's an anti-crypto agenda going on right now because while some of these banks are being saved, they're being told you can't have any crypto relationships or crypto business, which I don't even know how that's legal. I don't think that is actually legal. And, you know, unfortunately, these banks that went under, they can't really defend themselves in court because they're out of money. But look at this. Signature Bank is up for sale, and FDIC says whoever wants to buy them cannot be involved with any crypto business. How? You know, why? Why? Right? I mean, you have other big banks fail that has nothing to do with crypto. And you could argue Signature Bank or Silvergate, these guys, even though they're crypto friendly, that's not ultimately the reason why, like, they lost out and they went under. It's not like they committed fraud like SBF and FTX, right? They may have loaned out money, but still, you can't do this. That just seems totally illegal, but no one's fighting it right now, right? So there does seem to still be an anti-crypto stance right now, even though some of these banks that are failing have nothing to do with crypto. For example, SV Bank. SV Bank has nothing to do with crypto, and it has everything to do with actually bonds. Because the problem SV Bank had was they held on all these bonds that they couldn't cash out. You would think by buying bonds, you're buying cash, right? But their bonds were not set to mature until 10 years, 20 years later, and their interest rates are so low versus now, no one wanted them. That's why the Fed actually had to create a loan program so that you could put down your bonds as collateral to borrow against, yet the Fed has no money to begin with. That's why they issued the bonds. So now the Fed is loaning out money that they borrowed from people that need it now. That doesn't even make any sense, but it operates because they have a money printer, and now they're going to print maybe another $2 trillion just to cover this new Fed facility program. I mean, just think about it, all right? Just take a minute and think about what's going on here. And it should make you angry. It should make you turn to Bitcoin, because who wants to be part of this? You know, who really wants to be part of this? I mean, I made this example before, okay, in real layman's terms, how the Fed or a U.S. government operates. Let's say I'm the U.S. government and I need money. So I go to you and say, hey, I need to borrow $100, okay? But if you give me $100, I'm going to write on a sheet of paper, I owe you, right? And every year, I'll pay you interest. I'll pay you 4% interest. I'll give you $4 a year, okay? And in 10 years, you can get your $100 back, and plus you've collected your 4% interest every year, right? It's a win-win scenario. And you're like, sure, I'll give you the $100. I take the IOU. Now somehow you go into bankruptcy. You're like, I need money, right? And I go back to you and say, oh, okay, no problem. You give me your IOU back, and I will loan you $100 back, right? And you know what? You just need to pay me a little more interest, right? But I borrowed that 100 from you to begin with because I didn't have it. So how do I give it back to you as a loan, right? The only reason I could do that is if I have a money printer and I could print more money and give that to you. And then this is a small example. Think about if it's times however many banks out there, right? Like it doesn't make sense. That shouldn't be. We know the ECB just raised rates, even though you have central banks still printing out money like the Swiss National Bank, right? In the U.S., there's still a 30% chance this next FOMC meeting, which is coming up very fast next week, right? 0% is a possibility. There's a 30% chance. This is swinging wildly, by the way. It was like 50% just like an hour ago. Now it's down to 30%. I guess this is based on what the ECB just did. But this is swinging wildly, but I'm still thinking it's going to be zero. I think it's going to be zero. And as we get closer and closer, this probability will probably go up, right? I just don't see how Fed Powell could be that hawkish. I can't see it with all these bank failures and collapses and weakness overall with banks, or distrust in banks overall, right? Remember, the Fed has to instill confidence in banks, right? The Federal Reserve is a gigantic bank. It's a central bank, right? So you have to you have to reassure people that you could trust banks. People can't lose faith in banks. That's the thing. If they do, it'll be be a giant collapses around the world, basically. So he has to help the banks. So keep that in mind. But that doesn't mean you have to be in the banks or trust the banks. You could still opt out of the banks by buying Bitcoin. But you know what? You can only hold the population down for so long before everyone stands up and rises against the tyranny that's happening, right? So right now, it's been reported that since the collapse of SVB Bank and everything else, you have 70,000 Bitcoin that has been removed and put into self-custody, right? I mean, you could see that that's an enormous amount. The orange line is the liquid supply, meaning Bitcoin removed from the exchanges and being put into like a cold wallet, for example, or a wallet that you control, right? And of course, it makes sense because people want to opt out. People want to be in control of their own crypto and not depend on a centralized entity like a bank or even an exchange, right? Makes a whole lot of sense. And of course, Bitcoin is still doing really well. We're right under 25,000. So even though it looks bleak, it looks scary, not for Bitcoin. Bitcoin is actually gaining strength. Okay, so let's keep that in mind, and let's keep this in mind. If we follow some of the previous cycles, very good things are about to come. For example, the 2019 bottom, okay, after breaking out of that wedge, after consolidating a little bit, that's when things got really, really wild. And can we see that really wild moment this year? We'll see. I guess we'll see.